The goal of this particular video is to showcase different population pyramids and how they can be used to help explain the demographic transition model, but more broadly, the current demographic characteristics of individual countries. So what we're going to do is when we look at population pyramids, it's absolutely critical that we look at the different shapes of the pyramids. And if you want to know what's going on currently in a country, so at this moment in time, always look at the bottom of the population pyramid. Essentially look at the 0 to 5, the early age groups, because then that is a good indicator of the current characteristics of the country. So for example, if the bottom of a pyramid, the bottom of the 2000 whatever pyramid, the current year pyramid for a given country, looks like a triangle in which it's widest at its base, then it's a good example of a stage 2 country. When you start to see the base actually start to become more rectangular or start to be more symmetrical on both sides, in which you don't see every generation getting larger and larger and larger, or every generation getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but this essentially staying the same. So essentially the bottom of the pyramid is more rectangular in shape, especially amongst those younger age groups, 0 to 20, a great example of a stage 3 country. Finally, if we go to stage 4, so if you see an inward base at the bottom of the pyramid, if the pyramid looks like it's coming in, so almost the opposite of a pyramid shape, upside down in fact, we can think of those as being quintessential good examples of stage 4 countries. Now we have the United States 1995 population pyramid. So this is a moment in time. It showcases a particular pattern in 1995. And so what we can do is we can look at the shape, and we can identify specific time periods in which the United States has gone through these different stages. And so we can see that triangular shape. We can see how every generation gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And we can go back in time and see, well, when did that come to be? So if we think about, okay, 45 years old, 40 years old, that's where that change occurs. So 40 minus 1995, so essentially 1955. So something was happening in the late 40s to early 1950s. And what was that? That was the baby boom. So essentially we had a baby boom after World War II. All of that makes sense. We had GIs coming home. They've been gone for 4 or 5 years. They're mostly males. What do they want to do when they get back? They want to make some babies, and thus we have the baby boom. And so then over time, we have about a 20 to 30 year period where the United States is definitely stage 3. We can see how it starts to now stabilize. We see a change in this particular area. And so this would relate to the 60s and 70s, in which we saw this particular change. Birth rates starting to slow down. So you have the baby boom of the 1950s and 60s, but then it starts to slow down. Then we look at the base. Well, for most countries, you're going to see it continue to go inward shape. In the case of the United States, we are an anomaly. We are different. We are unique in the sense that we still see a large in-migration of populations from outside the United States, and those groups typically are younger and thus are having higher birth rates. And so, in the United States, we are an exception. We're always an exception. But in the case of demographics, in case of population pyramids, we might not have the quintessential inward base or the perfect example of an inward base, but what's going on there is the role of migration, the next chapter's topic. Now what I've done is I've added a black line to kind of showcase the general profile of our pyramid in 1995 so that we can then compare our population structure going forward. So we look at the United States in 1995, we can see the largest percent of our population were that age group in their 30s. So essentially the baby boomers. So the baby boomers, a lot of the students who are currently in college, this is your parents. So these are people who were born in the 1950s and 1960s. And so we can see how that group absolutely dominates. We go up to the top, we go farther up to the top, we can see particular patterns in which we see more females, especially once you get to the older ages. And so we have more females than males in the United States above the age of 65, and that's largely for 2 main reasons. Women tend to outlive men anyhow, so just in longevity, just naturally, but also the role of conflict. And so you have, of course, World War II, and then Vietnam and Korea, and so those combined factors help to explain why we see a sex ratio imbalance when we have more females than males above that particular old age group, let's say 65 years old. Further, if we look at the bottom of the pyramid, that's always what you're going to do as far as looking for sex ratios in which there might be a cultural preference for males or females. And you'll really see that play out at the 0 to 5 age group, or that youngest age group down at the bottom. And so we look at the United States, we see definitely this slight situation of more males than females. Now, one of the things is, on average, this, for some reason, this could be evolutionary, it could be, some other reasons that we don't know, but on average, there are more males than females. And so, all things being equal, there is slightly more males that are born across the world than females, just naturally. But we can see, for the most part, it's very symmetrical at the bottom when we look at males and females, especially when we compare it to other countries of the world, as we will hear shortly. Now we flash forward to 2015, and we can see, by keeping that same shape, the black outline, we can see how the population structure in the United States is changing. And so the first thing that's noticeable is, first off, the baby boom generation is getting older. But what's happening is the baby boom's kids, what they call the echo boom, they're now reaching their 15s, 20s, in their early 30s. Those are what we call the millennials. So we have the baby boomers and the millennials. And so keep in mind the previous population pyramid I showed, overwhelmingly the dominant group, the baby boomers. Now what's happening is we have two key groups. This plays a key role in terms of elections. This plays a key role in terms of economics, business. Who are you going to market your products to? Who are you going to sell to? Are you going to sell to old people, or are you going to sell to young people? Well, now you see that there's two different groups that are at different ages, of course going to have different stages of their life, different income levels, yada, yada, yada. But nonetheless, what we can see here is we can see, for the most part, across all different age groups, there's going to be there's more people in 2015 than 1995, with the exception of those, as we can see, they're in their 30s. We can see the black outline exceeds the extent of the 2015 pyramid. And so what that means is there's actually fewer people in their 30s now than there was in 1995. And so these are just natural ebbs and flows of population. And so we can go ahead and predict going forward what's going to happen is the millennials are going to get older, then they're going to start having kids, and we should see then once again another bulge starting to take shape at the bottom. This all, why does this matter? Why is this relevant? Like I said, for all variety of reasons. But we can think about, we'll look at teachers, especially K through 12 teachers. So right now there's actually fewer and fewer kids that are going into K through 12. But that's all going to change quite quickly when the millennials, when the people that are currently in their 20s start having kids, and those kids start enrolling in K through 12. And so all this plays a key role in the supply and demand of jobs, for example, in education. What I've done is I've highlighted the two main groups, the two key groups I just mentioned. The millennials are there in yellow, and then the baby boomers are there in green. And so these two groups overwhelmingly, and I'm not really a part of either of those, so I'm not biased here, overwhelmingly have a huge role in so much of the stuff going on in the United States. Further, one of the things you note is you can see a sex ratio imbalance that skews to more females as you get older. In fact, the age group in the late 30s is right about where 50-50 as far as males and females. As you get older, essentially longevity, women outlive men, so you can see how that sex ratio then becomes more in favor of females. And now I return to the United States population pyramid in 2015, and once again we go to the bottom. We look at those particular age groups to see as far as what's going on currently. In the United States, we're seeing a little bit of a bulge, seeing a little bit more babies, but that's essentially because the millennials are now having children. And so we look at the United States, we're a stage 4 country, although it might be a bit misleading using just the pyramids alone. So that's where the demographic indicators will come into play. But we look at some shapes and we see 2015 that still continues, in which there's a sex ratio imbalance, more females than males. But we can also see that big bulge in terms of the baby boomers and their kids, the millennials. And so those two groups, the baby boomers and millennials, have a huge role in so much that's going on in the United States. All of this is provided by an international database by the United States Census Bureau, and so they produce these various data and charts and estimates. And so the demographic indicators for the United States in 2015 we see here. First off, mid-year population, keep in mind that's in thousands. And so you have to add 3 more zeros to that number. And so essentially we have 321 million people in the United States in 2015. Our growth rate's at 0.8%, so it's below 1%, so it's a very, very, very low rate. Very characteristic of stage 4 countries is to have a low growth rate. We look at fertility rate, 2 births per woman on average. That's right about the replacement rate, and that makes sense. Replacement rate. So mom and dad have 2 kids, that replaces them. If mom and dad had 1 kid, that wouldn't replace them. So we can see that in the United States we have a fertility rate that's about at the replacement level. In the United States, key to that is we have still kind of a high birth rate. Not really, really, really high, but 13, anything above 10 is seen as being slightly high. So it's just above being what we refer as a low birth rate. So what's going on there is largely because of the younger people that are moving into the country, and so younger people then have their children in the United States, and thus cause the birth rate to be higher than what it would be elsewise. We go down to mortality. So we see life expectancy at birth, 80. It's rather high when compared to other countries of the world. Another characteristic of stage 4 countries is they have a high life expectancy. Infant mortality rate is actually not super low. We see the under 5 mortality rate also. It's low, but not as low as you might think it would be. We see the crude death rate is at 8. And so always look at the crude birth rate, then compare it to the crude death rate. And so we have 13 versus 8. So right there explains how the United States is going to be growing. One reason is because we just have birth rates that are higher than death rates. So in other words, for every 13 people being born, 8 people are dying. Further, another way to explain how and why the United States is growing overwhelmingly is in migration. And migration is not something I cover too much in this chapter. It's going to be more for the next chapter, but it's going to be something that helps explain what's going on in countries. And so we are a perfect example of a stage 4 country. Why? Slow growth rate, lower fertility rates, birth rates and death rates that are close to being the same. We also have a net migration rate that's quite positive. What that means is if people are coming to your country, something good's happening there. It's largely tied to economics. Now we look at the 2030 population pyramid. So what I've done is the black line is the 1995 pyramid, and the goldish line is the 2015 pyramid. And so once again, we can see differences. There's actually going to be fewer people in their 50s in 2030 than there are right now. However, there's going to be more people in their 30s and 40s. Now, why does that play a key role? People in their 30s and 40s are people going to be upwardly moving, seeking a new job, seeking promotion. It's when you're the most productive, I would argue. And so thus, in 2030, you're going to have a lot of people that are in that prime working age, but are also in that prime reproductive age. And so that would, how things are in the United States. If the economy is good, if all things are great, then you could see higher birth rates. But we can see these ebbs and flows in terms of population over time, and that makes sense. But for the most part, we can also see that across the board in those groups over age 65, so it doesn't matter if you're male or female, we're going to have more old people. And that's very much a characteristic of the 21st century. A lot of countries are aging, and so you're seeing more and more people in the older age groups, which we can clearly see here looking at the 2030 pyramid.